going to finish this book today, so it is not too much. Behemoth. That's the 2 chapters. Common requirements of industrialization. Cold War mass production. Cold War is between US and the Soviet Union. From the early 1940s through the 1960s, it became common among political intellectuals and academics, especially in the United States, to argue that the United States and the Soviet Union were becoming more similar, that ultimately they would come to closely resemble one another. No way. Berhan, an American backer of Leontovsky, initially accepted the exiled Russian leader's characterization of the Soviet Union as a workers' state, even if degenerated by Stalinism and the rise of Bonapartist bureaucracy. But in late 1939, is it very clear? I think it is very clear. 39, but in the 1939, he broke with Trotsky, coming to see the USSR as neither socialist nor capitalist, but as a new type of social organism in which a managerial elite ruled through control of state-owned property, contended that bureaucratic collectivism, or what he called managerial social society, represented a universal phase of historical development, the actual successor to capitalism rather than socialism, which has been posited as such by leftists for a century. He argued represented the advance guard of a form of social organization that the United States and the European capitalist nations inevitably would come to adopt. A few years later, Friedrich von Hayek, coming from the political right, made what is the political left? Berhan contended that bureaucratic collectivism, or what he called a managerial society, represented a universal phase of historical development, the actual successor to capitalism, rather than socialism, which has been posited as such by leftists for a century. Managerial society. Hayek, coming from the political right, made a similar claim, seeing a growth of collectivism in capitalist societies, pushing them towards the serfdom to which he believed socialism was headed. The idea that the Soviet Union and the United States were converging soon gained traction among American social scientists. The leading sociologist of the post-World War II era, Tosin Parsons, was an early adopter of the convergence theory, which came to be embraced in one form or another by other luminaries as C. Wright Mills, Ingalls. Leftists like Mills and Marcus fretted that the stifling bureaucracy of Soviet life was being recreated in the stifling bureaucracy of Soviet life was being recreated in the West, while Parsons and other liberal proponents of modernization theories thought that the Soviet Union would inevitably become more like the United States. What these theories shared was the belief that they will become more and more like each other. The West would learn the bureaucracy of the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union would inevitably become more like the United States. Why? They do not give any reason about this, but to this they give reason. What these theories shared was the belief that economic development was behind convergence. As Marcus put it in 1958, both the Soviet Union and the United States were shaped by the common requirements of industrialization, which pushed them towards requirement of industrialization towards bureaucracy, centralization, and regimentation. In effect, so they want to industrialization, so there will be bureaucracy and centralization and regimentation. This is reasonable. In effect, these authors believe the modern industry exists as a social and cultural system independent of the economic arrangement in which it was embedded. Ultimately, it would mold the larger society. They adopted the industrial society and the industrial civilization away as descriptive terms and analytic categories that bridged the Iron Curtain, capturing the central features of life in developed and advanced nations. By contrast, capitalism and communism were seen in sophisticated academic circles as atavistic slogans and of little explanatory value in understanding modern life. Ironically, at the very moment when some of the leading minds of the left, right, and the center were declaring that industrial development was resulting in industrial development. Industrial development were resulting in a convergence of the capitalist and the communist blocs. Their actual industrial practices were diverging. Through World War II, in both realms, industrial gigantics were adopted as a road to economic development, social progress, and modernism, a heroic effort celebrated in art. Industrial behemoth. I forgot what its name. Behemoth had reached its limit of profitability and control. Rather than continuing to concentrate on production of industrial colonies, they began to centralize the manufacturing in smaller scattered impounds. By contrast, leaders in the Soviet bloc and in other parts of the world retained a belief in the efficacy gigantic projects as means for rapid economic growth and as a symbol of national prowess and national and social progress. Though there were multiple reasons for the diverging fate of the giant factory in the United States, Soviet blocs, Western Europe, and what came to be called the Third War, the cause of labor organization was critical. The intensity of class conflict in the United States brought unprecedented benefit to workers in large-scale industry, making what retrospectively has come to be called the American dream come true, at least for a while. But it also contributed to the demise of the giant factory elsewhere with labor less volatile. Industrial continue to be seen as a viable path to the future. The downsizing of American factories came after a final wave of industrial gigantism during World War II, devoting to making military goods. Some armaments production took place at government facilities which survived during the war. The Brooklyn Navy Yard doubled its size, taking over adjacent land to build the largest dry docks and the world's largest crane, with its employment role hitting 70,000. But most defense production took place in corporate-run factories, mills, and shipyards and facilities converted to war production and new built for the purpose. Albert Kahn designed some of the largest war plants in its last burst of activity before his death in December. They included the Chrysler why it is not so light. Oh, thank you. My English is good. Thank you. And a little bit thirsty I have, so I just silent now, not speak too much. Responded to such publicity, higher income brought by steady work, unionization, and their tight labor market with a confidence evident in the many short wartime strikes held in defiance of the union movement's no-strike pledge. It could be seen in wartime photographs of industrial workers like those of Dohara Leak took at the Kayan shipyard, though with apogee in American life, though a few realized it at the time. The war brought the giant companies and the blue-collar war to their apogee in American life. So when the war ends, American worker will be unemployed. So Americans like war. So America, just as World War I, they also have a similar clash. The cumulative result was the revolution in the daily lives of the workers in large-scale industry and for their families and communities. The Steel Workers Union president once said that for working people, a union meant pictures on the wall, carpets on the floor, and music in the home. A quarter century after World War II, the workers in the heavily capitalized or unionized industry have achieved that and much more. Since once unusual and unknown among workers, home ownership, modern appliances, also they can get so much now. High income and welfare program provided by the government and employers, including pensions, unemployment insurance, disability insurance, and health insurance, gave workers an unfamiliar sense of security and well-being. Many resented the high price they paid for their improved way of life, especially the continued, if diminished, authoritarianism of forced production, the monotony of the assembly line work, the physical toll of manufacturing labor. Still, as Jack, the son of a John Pennsylvania steel worker, wrote of his family's experience, if what we lived through in the 1950s was not liberation, then liberation never happens in real human lives. So he thinks that his life is very liberation. Dispersion and downsizing, they are very satisfied with their work, with their life, liberation. While for workers, the strike wave launched a trajectory of material improvement and union power. For industrial, it brought home a lesson some would soon be gleaned under the strike. Even before the birth of labor militancy, a few large corporations have begun to hedge their bets, building small plants to supplement their main production facilities. Goodyear, Goodrich, and Firestone, in addition to their giant plants in Elkhorn, all had factories in Los Angeles to meet the demands of the West Coast market. Goodyear, the purpose seems a low-wage, anti-union center far from any major tire market. The purpose seemed primarily to low labor cost, and again a threat to youth to use against the Akron workers after the strike in the Mangold plant. Labor was not the only reason tire managers began dispersing this production. Technological innovation and the increasing of tire make it possible to build mass production plants that operate efficiently at smaller scales than the Akron mounters. As farm ownership spread and the population redistributed, setting plants near growing markets meant lower shipping costs. But the bigger factor seemed to be a desire to stop being hostage to small groups of workers. The sequential nature of tire meant that if one department went on strike, a whole plant might be shut down. Because their production should be sequential, they can't stop. If they just go on strike, then the whole plant will be shut down. When citing new factories, companies looked for locations where labor costs were lower and unionism is less likely to succeed. The radio company also reacted quickly to labor militancy. General Motors likewise realized early the threat of labor militancy presented to its integrated production system. So, no company ever, even giants like General Motors with huge financial resources, could quickly build factories to duplicate all the productions of their most centralized facilities. Plants like the Rogue and Dodge Man and the Chevy and Buick complexes. The strike made painfully clear to the manufacturing companies that they no longer controlled the physical, social, and political environment in which their largest factories operated. In the large theoretical literature on industrial location, labor rarely gets much attention. Differential wage rates as sometimes considered, but the presence of absence of unions almost always ignored. However, in practice, labor often was a key factor in corporate decision-making. One guidebook for executives charged with evaluating the placement of capacity, frankly, and a matter of noted informal decision rule that some corporates follow is no plant which is unionized will be expanded on site. Often new locations in right-to-work states. Automation and mechanization contributed to an impressive rise in productivity. Large factories continued to be rebuilt, but companies rarely erected the kind of giant showcase plants. Behemoth, A History of the Factory of the Making. Yeah, that's the book. Companies rarely erected the site of showcase behemoths, showcase plants that are sprung up across the manufacturing belt. In the late 19th and early 20th century, Appliance Park in Louisville, where the company manufactures refrigerates so many things, was something of an exception because they don't have to be consistent. Gigantic marches on. The disappearing worker. As American companies downsized and dispersed their factories, as much of the rest of the world, giant industries complex continued to be rebuilt and celebrated after World War II revived. On the other side of the Cold War divide, the giant factories, why the American shrinkage? With the shrinkage of the giant factory and broader social change, the industrial worker faded in popular culture and political saliency for a brief period after World War II. The media still paid attention. Fortune sent to A Life of Raleigh featured a Los Angeles airplane worker occasionally showing the lead character, played first by Jackie Gleason and then by in a factory riveting wings and complaining about work and the presentations of the rich, with white-collar workers beginning to outnumber blue-collar workers in the mid-1950s, and the unions increasingly integrated into established economic political relationships. Intellectuals too largely lost interest in men and working inside the bigger industry company, or at least no longer saw them as key to the future. Left-wing scholars follow us in the left abandoned area. Oh, I just don't know why. I don't know why they are shrinking. Large factory continued to be built. Begun on why they are disappearing. In the early 70s, there was a brief flurry of political interest in the discontent of the industrial workers. Their discontent, but an economic downturn quickly put an end to that. The next economic downturn, but they have to get a job too. The next time factory workers captured public attention, they did so as a result of the industrialization and massive social crisis it brought to the Rust Belt. Between this one, employment in the automobile industry fell by a third. Why? The next time factory workers captured public attention, they did so as a result of this industrialization and the industrialization that is till now, and the massive social crisis. With more than 3 dozen factories shuttered in the Detroit area alone, so it is 40 years ago. During these 10 years, the steel industry shed more than these jobs, cut 10,000 jobs and phased out operations in New York and so many places, eliminated 20,000 jobs in Gary, devastating the city, shut down the historical mill. The workers in the giant factory, once a heroic figure mastering volcanic forces and massive machines, at least in the United States, came to be seen as an atavism, a problem, a sad relic of the passing age. In the middle 60s, automobile industry once again took the forefront in Soviet industry, but the Soviets located the plants in the small city of the Volga River that had recently been renamed for the deceased Italian community leader. So they increase, but American they decrease the industrialization. First cities of socialism, as the Soviet Union helped the communist parties of East Union and consolidated their control, it fostered the region to complete the modern cities built around large-scale industrial projects, as has been the case in the Eastern Union. Had never had much industry except parts of it and Chovska, and much of that has been destroyed during the war. The Eastern European Communist Party were very small when World War II ended, able to achieve power only because of the presence of Red Army. Communist leaders faced a huge challenge in establishing their legitimacy, mobilizing the population for reconstruction, winning popular favor for their Soviet protectors. Cities supported new steel plants. Launched with great fanfare, the new industries and cities were presented as the first living embodiment of what socialism should be. That is a dream for them. First, I give you what a good life you can be, then you get it. It is contrary to the Western world. First, they do it, and then they have an exhibition. Though, like the mill, the city of this place stood as a national priority, its construction proved a long, difficult haul. That's authorities used agitation campaigns, labor competition, all kinds of things, but still not working. Plans for Noah kept being changed in some ways to the benefit of the city. The first housing units were quite basic, but keeping with the idea of Noah prefiguring a new socialist society. Many of the estates that followed were built to standards far above the norm of ordinary poles, with more space, private bathrooms, built-in radios, shared telephones in every entryway, cooling cupboards. The blocks completed in the first half of the has a generic socialist realistic stodginess, and their lower height and higher to similar housing elsewhere look like along the Stalinic, avoiding the monumentality sometimes wrongly attributed to the city, contributing to the human scale as the abandonment of plans for the unattractive towering city hall and the monumental theater meant to be bookend to the central axis. The efforts to incorporate traditional Polish element ranged from the charming, like the untactical top of the theater to the absurd, like one of the two factories and mystery buildings built to resemble a Renaissance palace like the Polish parapet. With Stalin's death, great variety crept into housing, including the modernist Swedish house apartment deriving of cost cutting, however, leading to the elimination of such features as elevators and parole floors. As the city population grew to exceeding original expectations, new housing estates were built on the outskirts of the town. Many of these were modernist in appearance, but of poor quality constructions, with low and high-rise buildings separated by green space with few nearby stores or amenities, the sort of tower in the park development that became the vogue for urban housing in both the communist and capitalist blocks, meant to be a showcase of socialist Poland. For socialist Poland, garnered national and even international attention over the years. Visitors, including the steelworker and town, figured in numerous novels, generalist accounts, generally propaganda and artist renderings present extremely positively. The pride of the nation, the forge of our prosperity. Some workers, socialist citizens like the Soviet predecessor, the showcase industrial cities of Eastern Europe were meant to not only to produce steel, concrete, and other vital supplies, they also were to produce new men and women templates for Soviet citizens of the future. We build this, the town builds us. That's true. The lack of any church in this place added to their alienation. First, for at least some, came to be seen as a beacon to a brighter future, but as a symbol of everything that was wrong with the socialist state. Experienced industrial workers who came to the pioneer Hungarian city had a more positive view. Poland, with the tacit approval of the Soviet Union, did not attempt to collective agriculture, so there was no discrete link between forced displacement and worker recruitment. Newcomers. German auto companies began to experiment with assembly line, but only moved toward integrated mass production. German manufacturers gained experience with mass production making armaments during the war. By the early, so now it's German now. Global giantism. During the era that American companies moved to smaller dispersed factories, and the Soviet Union stuck with the giant factory model, spreading it to Eastern Europe. Very large companies, some giant factories operating in mostly nuclear. Their World II. Germany had an industrial history somewhat different than the United States or Britain. In the 19th century, the crucible steel workers in Essen was one of the largest factories in the world, but in the first half of the 20th century, small and middle-sized firms dominated German industry, often working in collaboration with one another, as the country's industry strength lay in the production of diversified high-quality goods rather than standardized low-cost products. There were some very large plants making producer goods, most notably steel and chemicals, but consumer products plants remained smaller. In practice, German companies were slow to adopt its production techniques and the very large factories that can withstand due to capital shortage. Trade barriers that limited trade barrier. Auto companies began experimenting with assembly line. It's quite late. Now German auto company is so great in the world. When the national socialistic power socialist, a great admirer of Ford. Adolf Hitler is an admirer of Ford, pressed the company to join together to mass produce people's car. When they declined, the government itself took charge. German manufacturers gained experience with mass production making armaments during the war. The Mr. Company was founded in 1925 by Bank. Despite the long history of Egyptian cotton, so it's now is in Egypt. Egypt also want to get big companies. Through the small and the middle-sized enterprise continued to dominate the Western German small and medium-sized and the later unified economy. There was beside Volkswagen, some manufacturers with very large plants. The chemical giant BASF, once part of IG Fabian, but reformed as a separate entity after World War II, concentrated production at its long-established complex along the Rhine. It's managing along the line in Ludolf. Because auto companies, they need water to cool it down, so they must near the water. Nevertheless, they decided to continue investing and expanding its historic main plant, while later adding others to increase capacity. Worked at the site, which had 2,000 buildings, that's very large, remained the showcase of German industry, and Wolfgang, a temple to factory gigantism. Like Henry Ford, aware that a factory could be mechanizing tool, Volkswagen's management built an automobile theme park, Autostadt, next to the main plant. Had visitors. Many purchases arranged to pick up their newly manufactured vehicles there. After German unification, the company built an extraordinary new plant in Dresden to make its highest priced models. Glass walls make the production process completely visible, with finished cars displayed in a 12-story glass tower, a crystal palace for the 21st century. If Volkswagen exemplified post-war Western European industrial gigantism, dependent on stable labor relations through firmware and national social democratics. In Egypt is the heart of the Nile Delta. Demonstrated again the explosive potential when giant factories brought together masses of workers and treated them poorly. Year after year, regime after regime, the Mahala workers have been at the forefront of the Egyptian labor movement, defending their immediate economic interest and increasingly intervening in national political events as well. Was founded an explicitly nationalist enterprise created to fund owned business during an era when Britain still, despite the long history of the cotton industry, was the first modern mechanized industry to be owned by Muslim Egyptians at the end of World War II. The integrated mill, which did spinning, weaving, and dyeing, and employed so many workers. Authorities and company officials projected mechanized as a citadel of modernity, national progress, and economic development, but the workforce, largely recruited from the peasantry, did not accept the elite notion of the mill as a shared nationalist project. Repeatedly protest harsh work conditions and low pay. The first large strike, a brief strike, when the army officers led by seized power, overthrowing the Egyptian monarchy. Workers at the mill expected improved conditions, but when they struck, the army once again smashed their workout. In a measure of the giant brought together masses of workers and treated them poorly. Year after year, regime after regime have been at the forefront of the regional labor movement. In April, protected by Mahala workers, broken by thousands of police, leaving at least 3 dead, helped spark open opposition to Mubarak. culminating in his tumbling in 2011 during the Arab Spring. In February, workers at the mill struck, demanding the removal of Mubarak-era officials still in company management, even after yet another quasi-military regime took power, led by Abdel Sisi. Textile workers kept up their militancy, striking in another conflict over bonuses to protest a government decision to end cotton subsidies and to call for the outset of corrupt company officials, as had happened elsewhere. The launching of the giant factory in the name of the nationalism and modernity created a workforce with its own views of what that meant, in a strategic position to make their ideas about the past, present, and future matter. Oh, Foxconn City, that is China, okay? That is giant factories in China and Vietnam. Global attention to a company that 3 years earlier, the Wall Street Journal had adopted the biggest exporter you will never heard of. The corporate reaction to the suicide proved almost as disturbing as the deaths. The companies that used Foxconn to produce their produce, including Apple, Dyer. Foxconn founders and chairman Terry Gou at first dismissed the suicides as insignificant. But there was a darker side to the Foxconn reaction too. The company tried to limit its liability for future deaths by requiring employees to sign disclaimers saying should any injury or death arise for which Foxconn cannot be held accountable. The Foxconn of footwear is limited, a subsidiary of Taiwanese firm. Workers produced nearly 1 million pairs of shoes a month for international brands like Nike, as well as Yuan's City and many other Chinese factories. The plant included the dormitories and dining rooms for its workers, as well as a reading room and a disco built by Nike. Two developments led to the latest chapter of First was the opening up, starting of the Chinese environment to a private foreign capital, part of the national effort to boost living standards and embrace modernity, increasingly measured by global, largely capitalist standards. The second was a revolution in retailing in the United States. Revolution in retailing in the United States and West Europe, as in many product lines, merchants rather than manufacturers became the key players in design, marketing, and logistics, but no manufacturing. The convergence of these changes resulted in the construction of the biggest factories in history. So these are convergences of the revolution in retailing. Retailing. So 21st century factory, gigantic in many ways, resembles the earlier moments of outsized industrialization, almost eerie too, but in some respect it is quite dissimilar, representing a new form of the factory behemoth, while Asian factory giants have built on past experience in their organization, management, labor relation, and technology. They play different economic, political, and cultural roles than earlier giant factories, like the largest and most advanced factories in the past. Today's industrial giants embody the possibilities of horrors of large scale. They do so largely out of spotlight, highly hidden rather than celebrated as once more. Maoism, gigantism. In the year following the Mao complicated history of scale and struggle unfolded in the effort to modernize the country through industrialization. Fitfully, the Chinese communists experimented with new ways of organizing productions. At first, a story in the communist government with Soviet advice, but even before their 5-year end, the Chinese leaders began edging away from the Soviet model. The second 5-year plan never was completed because of a more radical departure, the Great Leap. Yet, even as the Chinese leadership shut down most of the backyard furnaces, reassured the energy iron and steel company along with the Daqing oil field became model for the leftist approach to industrial management promoted by Mao. The Cultural Revolution that began intensified the struggle over who should run the factory and what it should be doing. Mao's view during the Great Leap Forward, they argued that the factory should be a social institution. I'm not interested. Hometown networks play an important role in the movement, as migrant workers tell sisters and brothers and neighbors about the opportunities and city life, help them find jobs. Provincial and local governments have facilitated the flow. That's very true. Otherwise, who would leave their hometown? The severe global recession and the serious subsequent development unraveled its ties with profit rate declining as a result of increased international competition, rising energy and labor costs, tighter credit and inflation. Many American corporations, under pressure from corporate leaders, sought to reduce costs and shed less profitable operations to become leaner and more flexible and show a rapid drop in spending. They began outsourcing to other firms functions as they have traditionally performed themselves. They tended to start with support services, such as data processing and communications, but over time, companies began outsourcing core functions too, including manufacturing. Take sneakers. From their introduction to the 19th century through the 1960s, sneakers generally were designed and made by the same companies, mostly large stodgy rubber firms like United States Rubber Company. But then, dominance shifted to companies like Adidas, Puma, Reebok, and Nike that were built around athletic footwear and clothing rather than rubber, and focused on technology innovation, fashionable design, and marketing. While into the 1980s, most of the industry leaders, including Nike, did at least some of their own manufacturing. Increasingly, they contracted out production until they became essentially just branders. In the electronics and the computer industry as well, leading corporations began contracting out some of their manufacturers. Over time, contract manufacturers become increasingly sophisticated in their design and logistic capacities. Partnering with their clients is integrated multi-firm production systems, stitching together by electronic data communication. The new mass retailers have their origin in the Target was founded, but it was not until the 1980s that they really took off. Using a combination of low-wage labor, low prices, advanced technology, and highly efficient logistics, grew into the largest retailer in the world. Though no company came even closer to Walmart in size, other retailers based in Europe and like Carrefour, Tesco, and Home Depot ballooned through expansion and acquisition. With their massive purchasing power, giant retailers won an edge over their suppliers, whether well-known companies like Levi Strauss or obscure firms that made products sold under the retailer's house labels. new communication and logistic technology, including barcodes, computer tracking systems, and the internet, allowed retailers to monitor, communicate, with and direct supplier on an almost instantaneous basis. Instantaneous basis. Faced with this possibility of loss of massive orders, companies that made goods for mega retailers were at their mercy and often restructured their operations to meet their needs and desires. A parallel process developed in the growth of branded products. Companies like Apple, Disney, and Nike, such firms, achieved massive global sales by concentrating on product design and, above all else, marketing, making their products symbols of hipness, worldliness, modernity, and fun. Some of the big brands, at one point or another, did some of their own manufacturing, but typically they eventually outsourced most of or all of the production of the goods they sold. Apple initially the location and size of the contract factories serving large retail of contracting out manufacturing was that it distanced brand companies from the work conditions under which their products commute, seeking lower labor cost, usually meant relocating manufacturing to low-wage regions. If tribals' excessive hours, the use of toxic chemicals, repression of unionists, and the like took place within the facilities of a brand company, its image, its most important asset, might well be damaged. The location and the size of the contract factories serving large retailers and container shipping and expanded air freight capacity increased the speed and lowered the cost of shipping. Cheap international telephone rates. As retailer firms pressured their suppliers and subcontractors to lower their prices, firms scouted the world for low-wage regions to locate their factories. Mexico was one favorite site. So following the collapse of Soviet communism, when Eastern European countries, textile and garment manufacturers built plants in Central America, the Caribbean, South Asia, and Africa, and Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, attracted contract electronic manufacturer and more cheap labor pool and cooperation. And more manufacturers looked to China to locate their plants with its vast, cheap labor pool and cooperative government authorities. The staggering size of orders from transactional and corporations like Adidas made it convenient for them to depend on concentrated and approach centers. The change in economic shipping made it possible for them to concentrate manufacturing in a single small region or just a single factory. In the 19th and 20th century, even companies known for centralized, vertically integrated production like Ford set up brand plants to assemble products for Concentrated production did not necessarily mean big factories. Sometimes it meant in centers where many small plants and auxiliary clustered together. For some products, including footwear and electronic big buyers, markets have preferred very large factories. Using giant contract manufacturers like Volkswagen has allowed Apple and their ilk to operate without large standing inventories of products that tie up capital and run up warehouse expense. Even more important, just-in-time production avoids the possibility of being stuck with piles of outdated cell phones, laptops, and sneakers in what are essentially fashion industries. Tim Cook, the Apple, King Cook now. So this book is quite new. Executive masterminded the company's shift from in-house production to contracting out before succeeding. Steve Jobs once called the inventory fundamentally evil. You kind of want to manage it like you are in the daily business. If it gets past its freshness date, you have a problem. Have preferred large-scale factories for their own convenience, or out of a kind of corporate vanity, separate from the preference of their customers. The head of a firm that made cases for PCs and game consoles related that he preferred to buy land in low-wage areas close to major markets, build a large factory, and set up suppliers right there. Inside the behemoth and other foreign old factories in China, there is no echo of experiment with worker involvement and management that took place in state-owned enterprise. The genealogy of interest of internal organization of modern Chinese factory giants lie in Western and Japanese thinking of management, not in earlier years of communist China. Assembly plant jobs that require the rapid repetition of a series of motions for long periods of time are exhausting and even deliberating. In recent decades, China has experienced a massive, if not well-published, strike wave. All kinds of factories in China have been hit by walkouts. Large and small, state-owned and private-owned strikes have occurred in leading. Why I didn't see that? Chinese vocational schools require completion of 6 months of a year intern before graduation. Foxconn and other firms have exploited this requirement by working with government and educational authorities to have a large number of student interns sent to their factories along with their teachers, who serve as de facto for men and for women. Foxman Yue Yuan and the other modern giant of Asian manufacturing represent a combination of the history of industrial gigantism, the build on the past, incorporating all the lessons about assembling and the coordinating masses of workers, the detailed division of labor, externally powered equipment, mechanical transfer of components, and the pacing of production, economies of scale, and shaping every aspect of workers' lives, all of the past lives in the present. But the future does not, except in the most limited technical way. The giant factories no longer represent a vision of a new and a different world, a coming of a utopian future and a new kind of nightmare existence. Modernity style may be associated with high living standards and innovative technology, but not with a new phase of human history, as gigantic factories once were, whether it be the coming of a new type of social class in England. The future has already arrived. We seem to be stuck with it. Without reading this book, I would think that Foxconn may not work in China. Maybe they would go to places much cheaper than in China. Now it seems that Foxconn will end anywhere in the world for humankind. outsized have been with for 3 centuries. Some landmark factories giants have kept going. Whatever the future of the giant factory might prove to be, it already has left behind a transformed world. In some ways, industry have fulfilled the dreams of their promoters, have been part of and parcel of an extraordinary rapid and large improvement in social well-being, comfort, longevity, material possession, and security, some without precedent in human. Yes, the giant factories has made dreams reality, but it has rendered nightmares too. In every society, the greater productivity of giant has rested on great sacrifices. Okay, that's the word. The giant factory has left us with a complex legacy and many lessons. It demonstrated in practical, concrete ways the ability of humankind to exert mastery over nature, in the process vastly improving the standards of living for billions of people, but also despoiling the earth. It illuminated the deep ties between coercion and freedom, exploitation and material advance. It revealed the beauty to be profound, not only in the natural world, but in the man-made world, in labor and its products. It demonstrated the deep yearning of working people for control over their lives and a degree of justice. As decade after decade, century after century, they launched struggles against exploiting employers and oppressive states, often against enormous odds. But perhaps at this moment, the very important lesson of the giant factory is the one that is easiest to forget, that it is possible to reinvent the world. It has been done before and it can be done again. Do you know, when after reading this book, just make me think that those people who just relentlessly use other people, exploit other people, at the disguise that they are just they are just voluntarily to go to work for your company, then that's it. That's what that's the elite of the society do.